Bed. I'm the graduate recruiter here at the Treasury. I manage the recruitment process for our interns and grads all the way up to managers, principal analysts, and I've done a few directors now, so that's all been very exciting. Here to run you through the grad recruitment process though. We can talk a little bit about the internship program at the end, but with me here I've actually got Jess Jenkins. Now Jess joined us as a graduate in 2019 from memory, and Jess and I have been working together since then, and it's been pretty great. So I think the main thing you want to hear of is her experience. It's pretty much just going to be a nice Q&A session. So I'm going to be asking Jess a few key questions. She's added in her own here, things that she would have liked to know when she joined. And then I'll kind of wrap up in the middle bit there with some of the recruitment process before we open it up to any questions that people have. So Jess, why don't you introduce yourself before we kick off into some questions?
Sure, happy to. Hi everyone, I'm Jess Jenkins. As Laura said, I started at the Treasury in 2019. I did my undergrad at Victoria University in Wellington. I have a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Laws with honours, and my majors were in Public Policy and Development Studies. That all probably sounds like pretty governmenty, and it is, but I would say that I'm only one of a few grads in the program that have very governmenty degrees. Like a lot of people did just, sort of humanities, maybe international relations, economics. I'm sure Laura can attest to it, but the Treasury is interested in sort of whoever you are and whatever your background, you bring a really interesting and diverse way of thinking to the program. So I wouldn't want my background being quite governmenty to sort of make you think that you're not the right fit for this. In terms of my time at Treasury so far, I spent my first 18 months in the budget team, which is a sort of what we call a system team here. Like it works with many different teams in Treasury, compiles advice from different sort of policy sectors, and then summarises that from an all of Treasury view and passes it on to the Minister of Finance. We help him put together his annual budget, which is just a fascinating insight into the way that spending decisions are made in government. And then my most recent 2 years has been in the health team. So where before I was advising on kind of all of government trade-offs, now I'm focused on health. And I think Laura's got some other questions that will get us into a bit more detail around that.
Cool. So in your own words, Jess, what does the Treasury do and why do we do it?
So the Treasury's big pitch is that we are the government's leading economic, financial and regulatory advisor. Basically what that means is that anywhere that there's regulation or spending involved in something that government is doing, we are involved. Mostly that looks like what we call second opinion advice. So where, for example, in my current role, the Ministry of Health is advising the Minister of Health on policy change or operations that they're seeing in the health system. If that has a spending component, or if it's asking for government resource, whatever that is, then Treasury has an opportunity to advise the Minister of Finance on that proposal and say whether we think it represents good value, whether we think it's deliverable. So much of our advice comes back to the fact that resources constrained. That's whether we're talking about money or people or environmental resource, and therefore there are complex trade-offs involved. So we spend a lot of our time thinking about value for money, and Treasury's specific lens on value for money is related to this thing that we call the Living Standards Framework, which says that it's not just sort of financial well-being that matters to people, it's all sorts of different well-being, their health status, their education status, their income potential, the environment that we live in. So we are considering all of that stuff in relation to the way that we think about value of investments or value of policy changes. And then we have an opportunity to advise ministers basically where they should invest their resource.
Cool. And in a nutshell, what's your role at the Treasury?
So as I said before, I am an analyst in the health team. That basically means that I am working really closely with our counterparts at the Ministry of Health, kind of in what you might think of as a consulting role. We see any of the stuff that they're putting up to ministers and have an opportunity to comment on it, work with them on it. we are working quite broadly across the Treasury in terms of our views on their proposals. In terms of what being an analyst actually looks like, and this is maybe sort of jumping the gun and getting into a bit of what my average day looks like, but I would say that it looks broadly similar to what being an analyst at almost any agency or even private entity would look like, in that there's a lot of emails, meetings, writing and reading reports, spending time in Excel. It's like the broad Microsoft suite. And I guess, a lot of the time I'm working just with our internal team or with our colleagues at the Ministry of Health, and that can be up to sort of chief finance officer roles. But sometimes it's with really cool people, like we're writing advice for ministers. We sometimes have meetings with people like Ashley Bloomfield. And yeah, I would say that you become a very well-rounded, just professional, in that you add a whole lot of skills to your toolbox that would enable you to be helpful and contribute to efforts kind of in whatever workplace you eventually end up in.
Cool. So we'll go from there. So can you describe a typical day in your world?
Yes. When I was thinking about this earlier, Laura, the first thing that sprung to mind is that at the moment, every day I wake up and do the Wordle, but that's that's more personal life. The Treasury is really flexible and very varied. So we run around an annual budget cycle. That means that at different times of the year, the kind of stuff that you're working on looks kind of different. I would say that I am quite an early morning person. So typically I would get up quite early, do my exercise maybe before work, and then often I won't get into work until around 9 a.m. From that point, I would say, well, particularly at the moment with COVID, it's really mixed. Like a lot of people are working from home all the time. Some people are in the office all the time. Everyone's sort of making those decisions based on their own comfort levels. But it does mean that at the moment, quite a lot of my day is spent in Zoom calls, talking to different people and working up whatever it is that we're working on. Specifically, what I'm working on in health at the moment is the big health reforms that are happening. The amalgamation of 20 DHBs into a single entity, which at the moment will be called Health New Zealand, and the establishment of a Māori health authority. And so, yeah, I guess a lot of my day I'm thinking about budget advice, like writing reports or sending emails. It's all around that stuff. I always try to get outside at lunchtime if I can. And if I'm home, I live at Lyell Bay, so I can sometimes get out for a surf or go for a run at lunchtime. If I'm in the office, there's often friends around, so we'll pop across to Parliament Lawns for lunch. And there's always time to, pop out with a friend for coffee or meet a colleague. And yeah, just like a more sort of informal networking situation. Yeah, I'd say that's about it.
Nice.
Yeah, really can change depending on the day.
What has been a few of your project highlights over the years?
So as I just mentioned, I'm currently working on the health reforms. I would say that's been a huge highlight. It feels so meaningful and purposeful in that the objectives of the reforms are something that we can all get behind. It's about seeing more equitable outcomes in terms of health for all New Zealanders. But a sort of another layer on the interestingness of that project is that it's happening during a global pandemic. And so sort of grappling with business as usual, which is out the window, and what new business as usual looks like, and how we sort of navigate through all this COVID chaos has been so interesting and such a stretching opportunity for me, and I think for my ability to provide advice that's both sort of like pragmatic and also nuanced. I'd also say that in my first role, so budget team, there were a few incredibly interesting opportunities to be part of, one of which was delivering the government's first wellbeing budget. So that was back in 2019. But then obviously 2020 is when COVID hit, and there was the huge COVID response recovery budget, which was $50 billion. In my personal life, I kind of can't believe that I talk about numbers like that. But it's, yeah, pretty amazing in my professional life to chuck around billions and kind of know what I'm talking about.
What have been some of your career highlights?
Yes, I'd say in terms of the projects, those projects that I've just mentioned, I think that the work we do all the time is interesting and meaningful. So just full stop, I think every day is interesting at Treasury. But within those projects, there's absolutely some mountaintop moments or moments where you sort of look down and go like, oh, I can't believe I'm here. And for me, a couple of those have been meeting with the Prime Minister and advising the Prime Minister. And then separately presenting to a summit of OECD officials that involved getting up at 1 a.m. in the morning and zooming into Paris. But yeah, just incredible opportunities that we get provided. And it's those little moments that kind of get you through the sort of months in between that are still interesting, but not quite as like dramatic and exciting.
Nice. What is the Treasury grad program? What is it about, and what are some key components?
I would say that the Treasury grad program gives you a real foundational understanding of what working in government is like. You start with a cohort of other people who, you know, are in the same age and stage as you, and over 18 months, you both develop such good relationships internally. You get exposed to a diversity of work, but focused on the budget process, and you get intensive support in terms of training, but also, you know, you kind of get chucked in the deep end in terms of the work that you're doing. It's a little bit sink or swim, but you always have a team around you who are so encouraging and supportive. So for me, the graduate program, I would say, is just a really good, solid introduction to work life. And it also provides you with some really beautiful relationships with the other graduates in your year. For me in particular, a couple of my now best friends, we started on the same day in January of 2019. So even just for that alone, I'm so grateful to Treasury for the opportunity.
Cool. Just to plug there, it's an 18-month grad program. It's all fully paid. It's a permanent position. There are 3 streams. So there's a macroeconomic stream for those who are interested in the macroeconomic world. There's a capital commercial stream for those who are more interested in the business finance side. And there's our policy performance and advisory stream. And that's the one that Jess is a part of, talking about the budget and being engaged in the budget process. You can apply for all or just one of the streams. It doesn't matter. We can shortlist you later in the process when you're being screened as to which one may be a better fit. There is some criteria for the macro stream, and there's a bit of criteria for the capital commercial stream. So what I'll do is I'll put a link in on the chat just to see, just if you want to have a further look into that kind of information. The policy performance and advisory stream, there's no criteria in terms of your academic background. That's the cohort that we're really looking for, a diverse range of academic backgrounds, because that really fuels a really unique policy advice. And for the grad program, we're looking for a minimum of 15 grads this year. They can come from all over New Zealand, but you will be based in Wellington. We offer a relocation package, $2,000 relocation package to bring you to Wellington. And then if you are moving, we try and connect you with your team as soon as we load you into a team, just so that you can connect with them, figure out where to live in Wellington, where's the best place to go, does anyone in the team have a flat that's empty, that kind of thing, to support you in that process. And I'll pop a few links in the chat as well on the different streams. The job at the Treasury, the job is currently open, but it will give you a bit of a sense of as to what it looks like here. So going back to you, Jess, just noting the time, let's wrap up with a few questions. What groups or clubs are you a part of at the Treasury, and what other groups are you aware of?
There's a lot of groups at Treasury, both formal and informal. I'd say some of the most well-known or best attended groups at Treasury are Te Punawai, which is the Waiata group. There's Treasury Women, which is basically all women at Treasury, and they put on some really cool speaker events. There is the Sustainability Group. They have done a full, literally wading through Treasury's rubbish and looking at the usage of elevators and stuff to calculate what Treasury's carbon footprint is. And they have really made some waves in the building and made some real change. And then finally, there's the Rainbow Group at Treasury, which is very famous for its annual bake sale, and Carolee, who's our chief executive, each year that she's been here at least has made a very impressive rainbow cheesecake. But yeah, I'd say they're quite a well-loved group in the building. There's a whole lot of other sort of like informal sports teams and book clubs, and I'd say if you have an interest, probably there's someone else at Treasury who does too, and you can band together and do it together.
Nice. I'm going to skip a few of our questions, Jess, and go to the ones that are listed in the chat here, so I'll start answering them. The first one I'll do is how does Treasury support individuals pursuing further study? So do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to?
Yeah, sure. Treasury has a study policy. I applied for study leave when I was doing my profs in order to get admitted to the bar. So I was given, I think it was 5 hours off a week in order to like spend the time studying. The help that's available sort of depends on what the further study is that you're doing, and the way in which it contributes to your personal development plan. So that will depend on which part of the building you're in and whether you're doing policy or finance, whatever it is. I know that there's really quite significant support for people who are doing their CFA, if you're in sort of capital markets, debt management. I don't know about accounting, but I'd imagine that if you come in as an accountant, then same goes for your chartered accountancy. So yeah, it's really flexible, and you have all the conversations with your manager, and there is both financial assistance, but also sort of like in-kind assistance in terms of giving you study leave.
Yeah, there's also been a few people who have gone overseas to do a master's program, for example, and they've had a leave without pay period, and then they come back after they've finished that, so it's pretty cool. Andrew, I'm in my second year of uni. When can I start applying for internships? You can start applying from your second year. So our applications for our internship program don't usually go out until around September. And so keep an eye out on our website. You can create a profile on our webpage, and then when the job goes live later in the year, it will push you a notification, and that just saves you the hassle of having to remember when to go in later in the year. So you can create a profile, set it up to notify you about internship opportunities, and that will go live later in the year. But yep, second year onwards is totally fine. One here for you, Jess. Unrelated but curious, is Monopoly played at the Treasury?
No. There definitely are a bunch of games that are played at the Treasury which are not dissimilar to Monopoly. One in particular that's quite famous is the budget game. This is the game that we play with like students at high school who come through to visit the Treasury, and it's where it's sort of a role play budget style situation where you have a certain amount of money to spend and you can only spend it on, you know, a set number of things, and you're comparing spending on prisons with spending in education and so on. That normally goes down quite well, but it's not quite as
not Monopoly
board game vibes as Monopoly.
We're on the same bandwagon as everybody else. We do the quiz every week. You do your Wordle, like you've got your team Wordle going on. We have a puzzle set up in lots of areas. You see often a chessboard in some areas where it's one person's move one day and the next person comes back and moves it the next time they're in the office because people are working from home. So we've got our quirks, but Monopoly is definitely not one of them. Here's one for you, Jess. I'm interested in working on economic policy and reducing inflation. Is that something that grads would work on?
You would work on that, I'd say, most if you're in the macroeconomic stream. We have a macroeconomic and fiscal policy team who always take grads, and they specifically advise the minister on his fiscal strategy. So they're looking at the big macro indicators, including thinking about inflation, and are advising him like how much money to spend or not spend in the economy in order to impact what inflation would otherwise be doing. I would say that if you want to do like the pure inflation economic stuff, then probably Reserve Bank is also a good place to look. You know, they do monetary policy, we do fiscal policy, but we're good friends in that regard.
Very good. All right, question for Jess. How have you found being a grad during COVID? What are the good bits and the not so good bits?
The good bits are that it has been so interesting. I think, particularly thinking back to 2020, there was a period of time when just everything was hitting the fan, right? And like none of us really knew what was going on, like in the world, let alone in the Treasury. And I can just remember this one big organization-wide Zoom call in particular, which I just listened in on, where you had people who had been here for like 20, 30 years discussing how to respond and what we do. And I remember just being in awe of the intellect on that call, and also their hearts, and just feeling sort of so humbled and amazed by the quality of people that I was working with, and how much they cared about New Zealand. And then getting to observe the response and how it's changed over the last couple of years, and I guess getting to be a part of things like the COVID recovery budget, and now one of the projects that I've been involved in that I didn't mention but has been really interesting was the vaccine purchasing, and sorting out the Minister of Finance's approval of all of that. I think the work we've been exposed to has been just career changing in many regards.
Mm.
In terms of the not so good bits, it was exhausting. A lot of people got really tired, and I think that there's still some residual tiredness in the system still. I think that it's absolutely challenging, just adapting to a kind of hybrid environment of being at home or in the office. The period of time that we were all at home all the time because we were in lockdown, there was probably a bit more camaraderie than there is now. It's the new normal now, isn't it? So it felt kind of exciting in a way. But now I think just being, COVID is out there, and we're trying, everyone's trying to protect themselves against it. So just navigating the sort of hybrid environment at times is challenging. But I also think that Treasury is so flexible and has dealt with it all really well. And whatever way you work best, you are supported in terms of working in that way.
Yeah, nice. It's been year 3 now, so we're kind of into it, and we've got our role. We know what to do.
Exactly.
Cool. How does the Treasury support individual CPD requirements of various professional bodies? I think we've kind of covered that one off, haven't we?
Yeah, I think so.
Cool. Were there any other questions that anyone would like to put through before we hand over? Cool. That might be us then. Thank you all for taking the time out to listen and learn a bit more about our opportunity. Our applications are currently live. We're receiving them. I've just flicked through all the different various links to the chat field. So feel free to go in and apply. I've also put in some pages there for a bit more about the program and a day in the life stories, just to learn a little bit more about those different areas there. But thank you everybody very much, and thanks Steve.